COP26 or whatever the hell it's called, the climate alarmism conference in Glasgow, but also after an annual plenum of the Chinese Communist Party. These plenums designed to define the parameters of the party's ideology and policy direction. And something not unprecedented, but rather unique happened there, which is Xi Jinping's position was codified by the party, and he was elevated. You now have just not only Xi, but Xi Jinping thought that has been elevated to beyond critique. I wonder if there were more communists at this Chinese Communist Party plenum or the conference in Glasgow. Anyway, it is improper, dare I say illegal, to criticize the party, Xi, or Xi's thinking. And this has real-world implications in a piece that was nicely outlined by Kevin Rudd in the Wall Street Journal, who's a former Australian Prime Minister. One of the takeaways is this resolution that includes the elevation of Xi. The Chinese Communist place in the world as they see it. He writes, it offers the developing world a new model that China believes works, as opposed to the small d, democratic world's model that says it doesn't. It boasts of the Marxist basis of that model. And in launching the communique, officials lambasted a crumbling America by citing U.S. public opinion, contrasting it with alleged public support in China for the Chinese model, and thereby reinforcing Xi's political narrative on the correctness of Marxism-Leninism, the decline of the West, and the rise of the East. And unfortunately, Xi would have a lot of cheerleaders in the halls of academia, and frankly, the Biden administration. Have you heard from his exchequer of the currency nominee, Amarova? That's a fact. And the implications. For more on this, pleased to be joined for our weekly conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Heritage Foundation. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
You know, I just kind of had a flashback to the first years of the Obama administration, and it's relevant because, of course, virtually everybody in the Biden administration is from the Obama administration. But, you know, we used to say that the first 2 years were kind of Bush light, because Obama really didn't abandon a number of Bush policies until he really got his feet on the ground as president. And then he took foreign policy in a wildly different direction. I mean, if you go back to the campaign trail, you couldn't really tell the difference between McCain and Obama on the campaign trail. They sounded almost identical. But the Obama of 2 years later looked nothing like anything that he talked about. And Biden came into office declaring he was going to be a moderate. And on China, a lot of conservatives and a lot of China watchers said, well, this isn't half bad. He's good on Taiwan. He's good on the Uyghurs. And that's kind of disappearing, and kind of like in the Obama administration. So we know for a fact that there's a big debate in the administration between people who are desperate to find ways to collaborate, cooperate, and work with China, led by John Kerry, and other people said, look, the American people hired you in part because they thought you were moderate, and it's a consensus opinion in America that China is more than just a competitor. China is a threat to free nations everywhere, and you need to do something like that. And it's very clear that the Biden administration's abandoned that principle.
Well, according to CBS News, they said that this virtual summit today between Biden and Xi Jinping is going to tell him to stay out of Taiwan, that it's none of your business.
And the administration has sent all these signals. Well, this is really just kind of catching up, right? We're not going to. They've so lowered the expectations for this, and of course that just opens the door for the Chinese to just hammer them even more. Our China policy is in real trouble.
Well, I mean, sure. I mean, at this CNN town hall a couple weeks back, Joe Biden didn't even know what our China policy was. I mean, he treated Taiwan like a NATO ally, and with the prospect that China could invade, then, there'll be a military response. Well, that's not our policy. But I mean, so the larger concern here with the sort of the ever increasing strength of Xi, even if the sort of underlying contradictions of the Chinese Communist society and economy are still a major problem for the Chicoms. But his consolidation of power there and the weakening of U.S. foreign policy vis-a-vis him.
Well, I mean, Xi has the same problem as Biden, which is, reality gets a vote. And, I mean, Xi, I think, has overreached before and likely will again. China has some internal economic dynamics. They have a significant demographic problem, and they are encroaching on the freedom and liberty and interests of people around the world. And people are going to respond and react to that. And I think, honestly, in some ways, if Xi wasn't so demonstrative and so pushy and so forward-looking, the world might roll over. I don't know how the Biden team will correct on this. I mean, some of it you just have to. I mean, you just cannot keep marginalizing yourself every single day and expect to effectively be the president of the United States and get things done. But
well, you could also you can ignore most of this and just focus on climate policy. John Kerry's statement about staying in our lane. That's the only lane they care about.
Right, but even that's not working either, because it's very clear that China's not doing the kinds of things that are actually going to be meaningful in terms of its role as a polluter. We could forget about. I mean, we forget about this, greenhouse gases and all that, and just polluting the air, dumping plastic into the ocean. In any number of ways, China is the number one poisoner on the planet. They have no interest or concern or in not dealing with that in any way whatsoever. They are solely and myopically focused on growth at all expenses. When you do that, that's not only a real problem to the planet, but they are taking real shortcuts in terms of competing with everybody else. These are serious problems to confront, and Biden's climate policy is just not going to get you there, and people see that. The number one problem that Biden has on climate is that they've got the whole world paying attention to climate. But the problem is that when the world looks at the solutions that they offer, which are basically to impoverish us and allow China to run amok, a lot of people are like, I don't think that's a good idea.
Well, yeah, that's one problem. The other problem they have is the science doesn't support the hysteria, but I understand that's secondary to a lot of these policymakers. With respect to Taiwan, short of an invasion, I'm talking about by Xi, what about just continuing to hamper economic recovery in the West by interceding with the distribution of semiconductors emanating from Taiwan?
Well, I mean, China's as dependent on Taiwan semiconductors as anybody. I think the long-term strategy of Xi is to just convince the Taiwanese that it's hopeless, right? Get people from Taiwan to come to the mainland and work, build those ties up, isolate them politically and diplomatically, make them more economically dependent on China, and eventually they'll just fall into the lap the way Hong Kong did. So I think that's the real strategy, and I think in Biden, I think they have the perfect partner to do that. I think the reality is on a lot of issues, we simply need to start looking beyond Biden and starting thinking serious about that. I talked about immigration a lot lately, and one of the things I've been warning people is, look, whoever gets to be the next president of the United States, the first thing Americans want them to do is secure the border and start deporting people. So, dude, whoever you are, you better start having a plan to do that on day one. Otherwise, Americans are going to say, well, what did I vote for you for? And I think China's the same way. On day one, people are going to expect the next president to walk in office and start dealing with China in a realistic way that gets the Chinese attention to start to protect America's interests. So if you really want to be the next president of the United States, you better start doing that, because if you can't walk in day one and do that, people are going to say, what did I vote for you for? You're going to have the Biden problem. You cannot walk into office and be president of the United States, promise people one thing, and do the exact opposite. And then the exact opposite actually makes your life worse and think people are going to like you.
What on the other, one of the other adversaries of America, of course, Vlad Putin's Russia, and seems to be also trying to take advantage of this moment of American weakness and fomenting discord at the border of Ukraine with help from his buddy Lukashenko in Belarus, creating a bit of a migrant crisis combined with some concern about Putin's revanchism taking form in Ukraine.
So, we've got Putin's actually fomenting at least 4 crises simultaneously in Europe. So he's still playing with energy prices. He's still threatening Ukraine militarily with maneuvers. Then you've got the basically recruiting refugees from the Middle East, putting them on planes, flying them to the border of Belarus, and telling them to walk into Ukraine and Poland, which is deeply destabilizing to Ukraine and Poland. And then he's also there's problems in Bosnia.
Sounds like he's taking a page out of Biden's book with the flying elite immigrants around. Yeah,
well,
right.
And of course, it's hilarious to see the vice president of the United States, who's in charge of the border, go to Europe and complain about what the Russians are doing on the border with Belarus, and be completely oblivious to exactly the same things happening on our border, and you don't really care. That's just beyond incredibly crazy. But Putin's got at least 4, irons in the fire. He could push any one of them to, and I think that's the way Putin operates. He's an opportunist, so he puts those out there. And if you look at the U.S., where's the U.S. on any of those? We've complained. Well, first of all, we attacked Poland and Ukraine for being mean to refugees until somebody woke up and said, oh, this is actually the Russians doing this. And then we got on board, but we've done nothing except complain. We've done nothing to help the energy front. When the military exercises started, we told the Europeans, the Russians might invade Ukraine, and you should do something about that. And then in Bosnia, we've been absent. So this administration's effectively managed to look at 4 multiple crises and blink and do nothing. And you wonder why the Chinese and Moscow think they can just walk all over us. It's because we put down the mat and then, wiped it off so they wouldn't get their shoes dirty.
Sounds like a job for Hunter Biden there in Ukraine, I would think. Maybe that special envoy. He is Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, VP of the Catherine and Shelby Cullom Davis Institute.